wood. Them find out Mama Earth got gold then. Them mind out Mama Earth black soul then. You work hard just forget a black card. Same card where you swipe by back your black gold then. Voila. I see no faces.
Yeah, and then can I get one for the fish meal? Me.
Song for the children was never told about where the race is from. They never hear it in them favorite songs. Everybody calm as if slavery's done. What I go on when the babies come? I start read about things like Dogans, Black Kemet and Kush, Black Kings, Black Senate and books. We teach about pyramids and put real significance to we physical looks. So every word when we sing black, in my world everything black. Black, white, black, right back. So don't be surprised if me say me king black. Cause they never told us that black is beautiful. They never told us black is beautiful. They never told us that black is beautiful. They never told us. They never told us that black is beautiful. Oh no. Preacher is preaching, good God, the things that he preaches. I wonder who taught him to preach. Teacher is teaching, where did he get his degree? Now it is no mystery. Who taught us black history? He's up.
Super. Good. Inglewood. Purple rain falling down on the prince of the coast with the sunshine all year round. Purple haze over landscape, still I hydrate in the lunch line with the smog and clouds. Wood, start me out. This song's in the key of life, and love is in need of more. Young nigga from Inglewood, barefoot on the cedar floor. If black music is the blood, then my heart has been beating more. Rapidly, happily, I look back on Afeni Shakur. Her son paved the way. Now all eyes on me, cause I'm young, black, and gifted. Nina, all eyes gon' see. If you swung back when faced with a challenge that's meant to break you and balance scales, you ain't average, now throw your hands on three. Gon' put them up for black magic,
black excellence, black habits.
Hey guys.
Everything black.
There he is.
Sorry about that. Am I coming in?
We were
okay?
like, has he done a runner or something? What's happening with this guy?
Never.
We're like, where'd he go? Anjali's like, I'm gonna get my camera off. I'm gonna go get Dre.
I appreciate it, guys. I'm sorry. I was looking for the link. Because we've been like communicating all week. I've had like 1,000 links, so I didn't know.
That's what I said to Halima. I was like, look, I have 80 links. I can't even find the pack. Can you please open the pack for me?
Right.
Are you back? Are you home? Or are you still in the office?
I'm still in the office. Yeah, I took time out for this because this is so important, and I'm so happy to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for folks who are just joining us, we're going to be getting started in a few minutes. But in the meantime, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to see where you're calling in from.
Black as the judge rolled when the case closed. Now your life on the back burner. Black magic,
black excellence, black habits, it's black medicine.
Yeah,
everything
black chucks, everything black hug, black love, everything.
Praise like Jesus,
yeah.
Play like Moses. Give them flowers while they still give black roses. Everything
black tie, black bride, everything.
Halima, you have me feeling very, very old right now because I don't even know. I heard Kendrick on that song, but apart from that, I don't know who that is. So
it's D-Smoke.
Yeah, I know. I saw it in the chat, but I was like, you have me feeling very old, Halima.
It's all right. We are very old, but I enjoy it.
Hardly.
Blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. We dancing the soca too. Only fuck with few real niggas to chill with us, build with us, or deal with us. Never pull the trigger aiming at another man, but real hitters still pick up the phone. Motivation alone. Used to dream of really stacking my funds. Now my windows just as black as my guns. I feel divine. It came on time. God never changes, ain't gon' lie. I lost faith and cried, then my faith revived. And as soon as I let go and surrendered to him my talents, this young king took off like go-go gadget. There go that black magic.
Berlin. Hello, Berlin.
This black medicine, everything
Black chucks, black chucks.
I like this. We have a very international crowd today.
Love everything.
We probably have
Beautiful.
international crowds all the time, but I like this.
Give them flowers while they still give black roses. Everything
Black tie, black ride, everything.
Yo, this track is hard.
Yeah.
Like, yo, can we put that in the chat so I can download this later?
Definitely.
Oh,
I know. I'm feeling at home. You know, I was feeling
Yeah.
a bit kind of uptight earlier, but I was like, the beats came on. I was like, okay.
are you taking requests? Can we get that Ultra Black from Nas too?
I'll do some more at the end, but we are at 11:05, so I think we can definitely go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for sharing. Oh, there's another Halima today. Welcome. And yeah, we're gonna get started. So I'm gonna pass it over to Jonah if you want to kick us off with an introduction.
Sure. All right. So welcome everybody from around the world. I'm so happy to have everybody here. Andre, everybody's here. We're just saying that we're talking about anti-Blackness today. Not the most sexiest of topics, but something that's very, very important to talk about for both of our communities, not only the South Asian community, but also the Black community. So this conversation is about navigating anti-Blackness in South Asian relationships. When we say relationships, we don't only mean romantic relationships. We don't only mean platonic relationships, but we mean the both of them. So who am I and why am I talking to you? So if we go to the next slide, my name is Jonah Batumzi. I am a Ugandan American. I am a multidisciplinary creative, and I am the founder of the Blindian Project. So a lot of you people who have joined us today have probably seen that we've been working on the collaboration with South Asians for Black Lives. The Blindian Project, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, something very, very close to my heart, initially conceived or started in 2017, somewhat by accident, somewhat by playing around, very much by just kind of following my my thoughts and just being inquisitive, really. I'm a lover of culture, all types of culture. That could be skateboard culture, it could be hip hop culture, it could be Africa, it could be, I love culture. I just love people. I'm a people person. And I just love finding out about new things, new ways to do things, new thoughts. And I just store them into who I am as a person. And I like to think that it makes me a better person and a richer individual. Last point that I'll say is I like to say that I'm an uplifter of underdogs. Underdogs, marginalized people, anybody who has felt unseen, who hasn't seen their story heard, that's who I'm fighting for. So that's me. Shall we move on to the next person? And that's over to you, Dre. You are the next person.
Sorry about that. Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is Andre Goldson. I am an accountant by trade, a contributor to the Blindian Project. I think what got me into this work is obviously, aside from my own experiences being a child of Jamaican immigrants in America, just being in a Blindian relationship, being with someone who's South Asian has kind of opened my eyes to a lot of other systematic problems that happen as far as, anti-Blackness, colorism, and just things that are plaguing both communities that are just overleft from colonialism that we're still trying to work through. So I am honored to be able to be here with you guys and to be able to do this work with you guys. And I really appreciate everyone being here to listen to us.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you. Anjali?
Hi, everyone. I am Anjali Ferguson. I am a clinical psychologist by trade. Most of my area of expertise and work focuses around trauma-informed care and culturally competent care. And I primarily work with children and families. But within the last, I'd say 5, almost 6 years, I became really invested in racial trauma work. Really, it was after the 2016 election when I noticed a difference in response with the election results from my Black family and friends versus the perception that I thought people would have. And so it made me have to kind of unlearn and relearn a lot of things for myself. And I dove into this notion of racial trauma, which is now finally getting some more mainstream attention. So we're going to talk about that a bit today. I am in a Blindian relationship. So my husband is Black. And we recently welcomed our first, well, I guess not recent anymore. He's a little over a year old. I found the Blindian Project and was introduced to Jonah actually through South Asians for Black Lives. And I've been working with them for some content development, really enjoyed the community. It's been such a really validating place for people like us who have more unique experiences. So we're really excited to kind of share those experiences with you all, both the trials and the tribulations, and talk a bit more from a culturally responsive perspective on how we really dismantle this idea of anti-Blackness in the larger South Asian community.
Thanks for sharing. And I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Halima Brucha. I'm a volunteer with South Asians for Black Lives, first generation South Asian American based in the Bay Area. And I've been involved with South Asians for Black Lives since we started this as a group of friends, really wanting to engage our community in having deeper conversations about anti-Blackness, about racism, and building up the capacity for our community members to really engage in racial solidarity work. And so we do that through our educational platform, on social media, and through workshops like these.
Unmuted. Okay. So yeah, just starting the story. So Halima, I remember back in, it must have been March or April time when we first connected, or our organizations first started. And I remember the Blindian Project was below 1,000 followers, or a community on IG. And I think you guys were below, you were below me. And just to see what the last year has brought. Now your community's at about 55, 56,000. We're at about 22 and a half, 22,000. And for me, it's been a reckoning for a lot of people. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but it was almost like something just snapped. And for me, especially in the South Asian community, I saw a hunger and a thirst for knowledge and for education. And I saw a group of people really that wanted to break free of societal norms, kind of old traditions, things that were that I felt were holding people back. And it was just beautiful to see. So I was just reflecting on where we started from to where both of us are now. In terms of the Blindian Project, Blindian Project's it's a crowdsourced community. So if people are familiar with the Blindian Project, people submit their stories. I share a lot of stories, or we share a lot of stories there of Black and South Asian love. Now the name is Blindian Project. I am married to a South Indian Telugu woman. My wife's name is Sveta. She's from a place called Guntur. So when I started this back in 2017, it was very much a passion project. I never thought of it actually having this type of impact on people there, but it was about my life experience, right? So I'm Ugandan American, Black. My wife is Indian, so that is why the name is Blindian. Later on, I would say, probably about 6 months into the project, a Pakistani woman who's married to a Jamaican man reached out to me and said, "Look, I want this to be more inclusive." And I thought about it for a long time, and I couldn't falter, and I couldn't see any reason why we wouldn't be more inclusive. And the more that I spoke to her, the more that I saw similarities in her experience, in our experience, and just experiences in general. So when we say Blindian, and some of you might have seen this before, Blindian is representative of Black being African American, Afro-Caribbean, African, Black British, Aboriginal, it's Black, and the Indian subcontinent. For us, in terms of our mission, one of the main things that we're always thinking about is we're thinking about normalizing Black and South Asian relationships. Again, I will say this is not just romantic, this is also platonic. One thing that I personally, one assumption that I've made in my head is that a lot of these stereotypes that we have, that our parents have, they're born out of not interacting with the other community. So not breaking bread, not eating, not drinking, not hanging out, just not mixing with the other community. And when that happens, I feel like we're very much informed by the media or he said, she said type stuff. So we aim to normalize Black and South Asian relationships while also dismantling anti-Blackness within both of our communities. I will stress both. This is not just a South Asian problem. This is also a Black problem. And we have tried to share and highlight these stories where possible, where, for example, it could be a Nigerian Christian person married to a Hindu, and that struggle and that challenge of what is Hinduism, for example, right? I'm just going to talk about Hinduism. What is Hinduism? What is the multiple gods about? What is all of this about, right? So we're trying to break those walls down. In terms of our vision and what we want to do and where we see ourselves going to, we want to be the meeting place for Black and South Asian cultures, right? How do we do this? We do this by creating experiences that unite our communities, inspire solidarity. So if you're following our IG page or any of our social handles, you will see us reading James Baldwin books, talking about them. You'll see us having writing clubs, people writing about all different types of things. We have conversational series with South Asians and Black people from the community, and just really creating that space, trying to create a platform where we can learn, I say it all the time, learn, love, and grow for one another, essentially. So that is a brief intro to the Blindian Project.
Thank you for sharing that background. Yeah, it has been a very long time, since we first connected, and I'm so glad we've been able to do this collaboration, because one of the things that we were noticing is that every time or anytime we had actually named anti-Black racism within dating or within interracial relationships, we immediately had so many trolls and people just not understanding the concept. So I'm really glad that over this week we were able to kind of break it down and really explain how does this show up and what can we do to combat it within ourselves. Our focus as South Asians for Black Lives, we're a completely volunteer-led group, and we're focused on dismantling anti-Blackness in the South Asian community. We're US-based, so our focus is primarily within the American community through education and awareness, and I'll share towards the end a little bit about why we chose those two particular points to focus on. Our end goal isn't education. We hope that through education, people will be moved towards intentional solidarity and action. And so our vision is just seeing a world where South Asians are able to mobilize for liberation, for racial justice, after going through the steps of building awareness, building their own education, doing that self-reflection work and healing, so that when we show up, we're showing up with intentionality and we're showing up with solidarity in mind. So with that, I'm going to move to some quick community agreements and things to keep in mind. We're going to ask that everyone stay mute throughout the presentation, but if there are opportunities to unmute, we will name that and you'll be able to unmute yourself and share. You can access live captioning on the bottom right. So if you click closed captioning at the bottom, you should see a button on the bottom right bar. And then once you click on that, you can click the little arrow and then show subtitles. So that way you can see live captioning, which is provided by Rev Auto Live Captioning. So if you see the live sign, that's what it means. You can ask questions using the chat function, and we definitely encourage you to share your thoughts, using the chat function. You can also use the reactions to share how you're feeling. So there are a number of emojis you can use to let us know if you like something or you agree. If you need to take a break, please do so. We urge you to take care of yourself as needed. And just keep in mind that we're all at different knowledge levels. And so we're all coming from a different perspective, and we're all on our different journeys of learning. Be open to the possibilities for what is shared. There might be new things today. And with that, lean into discomfort. We will be having uncomfortable conversations and self-reflections, and that is part of the work for us as we think about how to move towards anti-racism, and it means confronting our own racial biases and racist actions. And so we urge you to lean into that discomfort and really be aware of that. We also ask that we are mindful about the space that we take up. So making sure that we give everyone an opportunity to kind of participate. And also, just a side note, this was shared via Eventbrite, but this session is being recorded and parts of it may be shared publicly on YouTube, and we will also be emailing each of you a copy of this session.
Can I just say something quickly, Halima?
Absolutely.
So I think especially for Andre's portion of the conversation, and I think for Anjali's as well too, we very much want this to not be a situation where we're just talking to a screen effectively and and looking at the chat. But there are moments of reflection. There are moments that we want to engage the community here, people here. I would just ask that, as you pointed out, and rightly so, everybody is at different stages, which is fine. I'm at a different stage than everybody else as well too. Let's not be judgmental of what people are saying. It's okay to be wrong, and that's where the learning comes in. And I think you hit it on the head as well too. There's nothing wrong with that, with being uncomfortable. I myself played athletics for about 20 years of my life, and I didn't get any better by not continuing on when I was uncomfortable, right? So that's when the actual work and when we improve ourselves and get better. So everybody's here for a certain reason, whether it's romantic, platonic, whatnot. So let's just try to allow everybody to get the most out of this opportunity.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, definitely. All right, so here's the agenda for today. We are going to start by just sharing an overview of what is anti-Blackness, what is colorism, defining these terms so we're all on the same page. Andre and Jonah will be leading a section called Dear Brown People, and then Anjali will be speaking on her section, Keeping Up with the Patels, and then we'll be closing out with a section on South Asian anti-racist solidarity within the context of relationships. And then we'll have some time for questions, discussion, and then in the closing, we'll be sharing ways that you can keep in touch with us, as well as post-workshop follow-up items.
Cool. What is anti-Blackness, right? So we'll read this. Systemic and interpersonal disregard for Black people, history, culture, emotions, wealth, and anything regarded to Black people. Anti-Blackness is both subtle and explicit and is held together by policies, culture, and systems that actively oppress Black people and Blackness. It's a form of racism and specifically called to name the increased racism and harm Black people face. I personally would actually even go a step further. There's obviously it's Black people, but I actually think that anti-Blackness extends even further to it could be people based in India and touching a bit on caste or dealing a bit with caste. And there could be somebody who is darker skinned. Now, for me, I'm calling that anti-Blackness as well too. So I don't think that, for me actually, I don't think the anti-Blackness is just explicitly contained to Black people, but it can go further, right? Anything to do, negative feeling towards Black. Okay. Racism, socially constructed system of oppression that is rooted in anti-Blackness. Anjali will be touching on systemic racism a bit later on. I think she has a very good video for this as well too. It manifests in the dehumanization of people of color, abuse, and genocide, and is based on a hierarchy that informs structures of power among all racial ethnic groups, right? So 2020, what a year. It's a year that I don't think anybody on the call here should ever forget in the span of our lifetimes. I think we'll probably be telling our children and our children's children if we last that long, about 2020, and the racism, microaggressions, and everything that that we faced, especially as people of color. Colorism, practice of discrimination by which those with lighter skin are treated more favorably than those with darker skin. Obviously, it holds white standards of beauty and benefits white people in the institutions of oppression. So Andre and I will also be touching on colorism a bit. This is, I was going to say this is a good point. It's not a good point. It's a horrible point. This is a point that manifests itself in both of our communities, right? This isn't just, again, a South Asian thing. This is a Black thing as well too. We'll be talking a bit about skin lightening cream later on. Obviously, we know about Fair and Lovely or Glow and Lovely, whatever they branded them, rebranded themselves to. One of the other major markets is Africa. If you look at Nigeria and places like that. So my personal thoughts are, as I've started to look at the histories of our people and places that we've coexisted, colonization has played such a large role into some of the self-hate that we face, and just some of our reasons for being attracted to this idea of whiteness. Okay, let's go. Right, here we are. Dear brown people, we thought a lot about this this section here. Andre, thank you for coming up with this title, by the way. We brainstormed for a very, very long time, and we came up with this Dear Brown People title and section. This is reflections on anti-Blackness from two Black men in Blindian Relationships. I am in a Blindian relationship as well too, and have been for about 13, 14 years. Andre, congratulations. I know that you're recently engaged. So let me hand over to you right now for this little bit.
All right, guys. This is a letter. So, dear brown people, they lied to you. They lied to me. There is no model minority. There is no salvation in going along to get along. Lighter is not brighter, and darker is not worse. We are more than the beautiful skin we were blessed to live in. But in getting you to hate yours, it's no mystery why you hate mine. No mystery why your mothers want you not to be loud or dressed like I do, because maybe someone will mistake you for one of them, one of me. It's just better if you stay away. Stick to your own kind. Nobody shoots brown boys or brown girls. But after 4 years under the cusp of authoritarian dictatorship, can you still live in that delusion? Did the HYPSM or elite school you attended ease your fears as men carrying torches marched the streets? Did your eager smile and witty retorts at your auntie-approved job make subtle jabs at your culture sting less? I love Indian food, but it's so spicy. I love Indian weddings. It's such a show. Did your caste or complexion make you feel safe as terrorists stormed the Capitol building, hoping to take back their country? Or did you feel the same pain and disgust as we saw the life squeezed out of a man for over 8 minutes? Did you feel the same anguish when a young woman was killed in her bed for the crime of existing in the wrong house? Because I felt it when they pulled the hijab off of Muslim women in November of 2016. I felt it when they screamed at South Asian women in the subways of Brooklyn to go back to their countries. I felt it when an Indian man was shot in a Kansas bar before hearing the word terrorist. So I definitely feel you. Can you feel me, dear brown people?
Thank you, Andre. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. Thank you. Right. We're into colorism after that powerful note. Let's go. Let's go. Colorism, right?
Yeah. All right. So what is colorism? Colorism. Don't spend too much time in the sun. You'll get black. Definitely have heard that both in my community and was very surprised to hear that goes on in the South Asian community as well. It is this kind of thing where we're kind of just pushed to see that anything darker than what we are is supposed to be worse. So we're subconsciously fighting to get closer to lighter. Let's see. Comparing and contrasting complexion of children from the moment they are born. And actually, I think, Jonah, you have a really good story on that one. I'd love to.
Yeah, definitely. So so we have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. Now this note here, and I don't know how many other people have kids who are on the in the chat, whatnot, but this says from the moment they're born, and we were talking about this earlier today, and I was just thinking, from the moment that they enter into this world, people are thinking about their complexion and judging them on their complexion. But as we actually started talking about it today, we reminded ourselves that it's actually before children are actually even born. When the mother is 3 months, 4 months pregnant, people are already talking about what will the kid look like? What's the hair going to look like? What complexion are they going to be, right? And I think that right there lets you know everything that you need to know about colorism. Instead of being happy and overjoyed that the mother is pregnant, is going to give or is birth to a beautiful new life, male or female. It's more about what color they're going to be. And I know myself, one thing that I've experienced is a relative of mine speaking to my children, and we're hanging out in the sun. Every time that we are have been out in the sun, whether we've gone to Ibiza or we've gone to like Greece or a holiday like that, whenever we come back, and they are, for me, this beautiful complexion of when you can see someone's been out in the sun, that's one of the first comments that we hear. It's like, oh, she's gotten dark. And one image that will always remember, that will always stick with me, is when we came back from a holiday. We had been hanging outside. It was pretty hot outside. And the person was speaking to my daughter and my son, and they said, don't be out too long. Don't stay out too long. Make sure you put your sunscreen on, which is fine. I agree with sunscreen. I use sunscreen at times as well too. But at kids being kids, as they asked, why, mama, why not? And the comment of, because you will get blood, came out. And it was almost at that point in time that person realized that you shouldn't say that, and you can't say that. And do you know how much harm you do to that child by already associating the color Black with something negative? So I felt that. Yeah, that's someone might need to go on mute. There's a
Sorry, that's
ringing.
me. It's this awareness app thing that I have, and every hour it does like a singing bowl to remind me to take a break. And you're probably seeing my water reminders too, so I apologize.
Okay, I thought I said something really good or something. It was like claps from the audience or something like that. But no. So that's me. In regards to children and how complexion and colorism comes into play there.
Should I play the video?
No, not yet. We got one more point.
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. Skin lightening creams. And I think Jonah alluded to this earlier. Yes, it's big in the South Asian community with Glow and Lovely, but that's also been big. Also, I found out recently in Jamaica. I kind of missed that whole wave because I used to go every summer as a kid up until I was about 12 or 13. And just to kind of find out now that that's like a huge market. So there's a lot of business being made, billions of dollars being made on our insecurities pushed on us by the hundreds of years of colonialism.
Yeah, I think it was Vybz Kartel, who was a Jamaican artist, I believe, actually had a skin lightening cream. And if you know Vybz Kartel, he you'll see him later on, and he's obviously his shades of his skin have changed quite significantly. But you just think about all of the damage that bleach has done to his skin. So
I also saw a video actually of a new technology, like a laser that zaps your melanin And I was seeing that people using that in South Asia too. So it was very heartbreaking to see that.
Yeah, they have also like a diamond. I think like they can like skin abrasion, like that kind of thing. They can do it with diamonds to brush out your skin complexion and make it like lighter. So yeah, that's been around for a minute.
Can we roll this this video? This old school Fair and Lovely?
Really beautiful. Your face is fair and glowing. It must be married.
Don't believe that. For 2 months, I've been using Fair and Lovely. It lightens the color of the skin in a natural and gentle way.
Really?
And also protects the skin from the sun. Listen to your elder sister and try it.
Perfect. So I'll make a beautiful bride like you.
Fair and Lovely makes you noticeably fairer, gently.
There we go, Ashwarya Rai. I don't know. I don't even remember what year this was, but obviously she's been a massive Bollywood person. There've been a lot of Bollywood figures who have promoted these as well too. But just that idea that yeah, it looks like 96. It might be 93. Just this idea that you are going to be valued more if you are lighter. You will be a more valuable bride if you are lighter. And other people have told me about other things. You will get a better job if you are lighter. Messed up thing is sometimes that actually is true. But at what cost, really? At what cost? If we go to the next slide, we actually have some reflections there. And so we want to, yeah, there we go. We want to ask these reflections. We want to give you some time, and then we want to engage with you, right? We want to talk. We don't want to be talking the whole time here, right? So you want to take that first one, Andre?
Sure. How does colorism impact our relationship with Black and darker skinned people? So it doesn't have to also just be Black people, it can be darker people within the South Asian community.
And the other point that I will say is, how does colorism inform our relationships with friends and family who associate with Black people? So just very, very quick, and I'm not going to talk on this long. You may see aunties, uncles who look at somebody perhaps maybe dating a Black person and thinking that that person may be a bad influence. So let's give a few seconds here for people to think. Let's give it 30 seconds to a minute. And then if we can perhaps open this up to 1 or 2 people to hear their experiences or what they think, then that would be amazing. Obviously, we have our thoughts and we have experiences that we've shared with other people, but it'd be great if anybody wants to personally share anything that they may have experienced in relation to these 2 points here.
Yeah, and folks can also use the chat if you prefer that. You don't have to unmute to speak. I am seeing a lot of discussion in the chat about colorism and its impact in various communities in the Philippines. Yeah, just a lot of different comments around the widespreadness of that. And even growing up, heard those kind of comments, don't stay out too long, and it's going to impact who wants to rishta you, and very common, unfortunately.
Don't be shy, people. Don't be shy. Nobody's going to slap your wrist for saying anything, even if you say something inappropriate. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Cool. Let's move.
Oh. Okay.
Is there somebody there? Someone want to speak up?
Hi, I'm Olivia.
Hello, Olivia.
Hi, guys. I'm in my pajamas, so I don't have the video
Don't
on.
worry.
I lived in Thailand for 6 years. And a friend of mine, he's from the UK. He is Black, but he was staying with friends of his in an apartment, and the friends of his were white. And they actually got kicked out because they said that my friend, his name is Kieran, he's Black, was dealing drugs to them. He wasn't, he was a teacher, but they evicted the two people that he was staying with because they just assumed that he was a drug dealer and he was up to no good. So I've seen it a lot, especially living in Bangkok. I'm Black and Japanese, and I've had so many people comment about my skin being too dark. Why don't you lighten your skin? You'd be so much more beautiful. And that was something I had to face a lot. And yeah.
And I'm also seeing in the chat a comment about the marriage ads and how they perpetuate this colorism.
Well, I think, yeah, there's so many things to do. Even if you look at Bollywood, I mean, if you look at what they're doing, even with this brown face and things like that, with them wanting to have roles where you might need a darker lead character, but instead of going out to find a person who may resemble that or look like that, they're just basically getting popular people and having them darken their skin. So. I mean, we could probably talk, you could have a whole 2-hour conversation on colorism. We just wanted to bring in a flavor of it and just really reflect on it. Has colorism, the way that you have been brought up and your thoughts on colorism, has that actually made you be resistant or hesitant to actually make relationships with Black people?
I definitely think so. Hi, I don't know if anyone can hear me.
We can hear you.
I think like, yeah, I think like what comes up for me is just that when you hear these messages so young, like from birth, basically, that like your proximity to whiteness is going to make you more valuable or beautiful or accepted or you'll belong. What happens is that it becomes so deeply ingrained. This anti-Blackness becomes so ingrained. And so it becomes this like really deep process. At least for me, it has to be a really deep process of unlearning that, because it's not something that I can just like read a couple slides or like get educated a little bit and then suddenly it's not there anymore. I think it's something that needs to be worked on at like an embodied level for a really long time, like a lifelong thing for me, because those messages are so powerful when you're young, and then they stay there into adulthood, I think. So I think it's so deep and takes a lot of work, I think.
I agree, and thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that.
I just also wanted to add.
Hi, can you hear me? It's Vaish.
Yeah,
hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
What I never understood when I was younger was my relatives were so happy to have friendships with Black families, Black co-workers, but when it came to integrating someone into, I don't know, say if a cousin was engaged to a Black person, if it was integrating them into their family, that's when it would become an issue. And I just never understood why it was like that.
Well, because everybody knows. That's kind of the insidious thing about colorism and anti-Blackness as a whole, is that we all know on some level that we, as a community, as a world, treat Black people differently. And even if you're the most empathetic, loving person, you know that you don't want that smoke too. So it's okay to be friends. It's okay to kind of hang around. But when the real heat starts coming, I don't want to be anywhere near that. And I'm not saying that as a critique of everybody, but it is evident in the way that we kind of structure ourselves around one another. If that's going to be the reaction, it's cool to hang out with, but don't date, don't marry, don't have kids with that person.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting poked because we need to move. But one thing I'll just say to cap that off is when I was going through the process of meeting my wife, there were a lot of uncles, sorry, not a lot, but 2 or 3 uncles who were instrumental in making that happen. And great, they pushed for it. But the question that would come back to them, and not for me, but like outwardly, that would be very, very interesting, is what would happen if your daughter brought home a Black man, right? And I think this goes to the question that the person just asked. Are you still going to be like, yeah, it's all good? Or are you actually going to be like, no, this can't happen, Okay, so that's that. We'll come back to colorism later on if we have time. So this is about romantic relationships. I'll kick this off. BMW, show of hands, or can we get any emojis if people knows what people know what BMW is about? This phrase BMW. Yes, I'm seeing one. Yes, I'm seeing Dre raise his hand. Yes. So for me, I heard about this a couple years ago. Let's say Black, Muslim, and white. So you can see the phrase taboo hierarchy of interracial relationships. It's almost like if you watch football or if you watch IPL, it's almost like a league table. And essentially, Black people are meant to be on the bottom of that league table, right? So it's supposed to be, if you marry outside of your race, a white person is the best person to make to be with. Sorry, Muslim would be next, and then Black would be last. Okay, so I've heard numerous stories of again, somebody else mentioned this, from the age that people are very young. It could be 6, it could be 7, it could be 9, it could be 12. There is this kind of I'm not going to call it brainwashing right now. I'm going to call it conditioning to drop subtle hints that marrying people outside of the culture may not be appropriate, but definitely do not marry a Black person. Okay. Now, one other thing I'll draw your attention to is this picture in the middle here. This was drawn, or this was illustrated by a 23, 24-year-old. She might have been Pakistani woman from England, from London. This is that's her telephone screensaver, and that is a message from her parents, right? So she had a Black partner that she ended up being serious with, and that is her father telling her, you're not my daughter, you're not my child, I don't want anything to do with you and your Blackies. Okay, so my question is, how does negativity surrounding interracial relationships shape your and our future relationships?
I also wanted to point out, Jonah, like as you were saying this, I was thinking about, has anyone seen Bend It Like Beckham? Because there was a very particular scene in that I will never forget after watching that for the first time, because she went down that whole list of like, this person no, Black, no way. Actually made the motion of no way. That was my first introduction to that kind of anti-Blackness.
I don't remember that part, but I'll have to check
stuck
that out.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody want to comment to that? Anybody have any thoughts or feedback to that part about romantic relationships? Anybody have any experiences to talk about parents telling them about not marrying outside of the race and what it may mean?
Hi, everybody. My name is Nikita. I'm here with my partner, Charles. And so we've been, I'm North Indian and he's Black. And we've been together for about 2.5 years. And I let my parents know about 5 months into the relationship about us. And I'm 43. They've been waiting for me to get married. They've been, all of this stuff, all of this pressure. And when I shared with them about him, they basically went into silent treatment mode. And it's basically been, we haven't been able to talk about it since. And so it's a really, really difficult strain emotionally on me, for sure, and on us. And I find that I can't just revel in the beauty of our relationship and the love that's here, because there's this looming gray cloud and this feeling like I have to give up my family or I give up myself for this choice. And, and we don't have a lot of time. My folks are in their 70s. And so I worry every day that, okay, they're getting older. Where are we headed here? And I sometimes just am at a place where I don't know if there's ever going to be any resolution. So yes, it impacts us every day.
I also wanted to, I really appreciate this conversation. A lot of it resonates with me. I think especially within dating, and by the way, my name is Robin. I'm North Indian, I'm Bengali, and half white. So my parents had an interracial relationship. And And something that I've even observed from their relationship with my own, where, you know, I'm here with my partner, Drew, who's a Black American woman. And is that even within interracial marriages, like especially in America, there's a preference toward, while there's still a lot of obviously anti-Blackness toward Black people, it's that in America, you know, Blackness is seen as more masculine, you know, and that has, it's more preferable if you're, you know, to date a Black man than it is to date a Black woman, meaning that, like, you know, that often there's been all this research coming out about on Tinder how like East Asian men and Black women are consistently seen as, you know, the least attractive. And I think that this is something that I've observed. You know, my dad is a relatively, you know, brown-skinned South Asian man who chose to marry a white woman. So relatively, like, I mean, while he did still have family members that, you know, kind of distanced themselves from him or even straight up stopped talking to him because he dated outside of his caste, you know, culture, race, religion. Like everyone would say, you know, it was still preferable that he was with a white woman versus, you know, what my own experience is, where it's like, man, my parents had an interracial relationship, but they know to an extent what it was like, but I still definitely do not feel that same level of support. They're like, okay, they went through that, they experienced some alienation, but couldn't give that same level of support to me being with a Black woman. And I did exclusively white women before, you know, or been in relationships with white women before and felt a lot of support. So it isn't just, even for me, just about dating outside of your race, you know, it's anyway, I know I'm rambling, but.
No, it's all good. It's all good. One thing I want to pick up on before we move on is this whole notion that somebody said that Black women and South Asian men are least desirable, right? Now, I tried to do a bit of research on it, right? I think it was the OkCupid CEO, who isn't the CEO anymore. Obviously, he had a dating site. Now, we all should know that dating site should be viewed under a white lens, right? It was for white people. I don't think they were looking to cater to people of color, right? So woke up one day, decided to write a paper, journal, write his feelings, and in his data, he happened to say, this, I'll keep talking about this, right? He said that the least desirable people were Black women and South Asian males. Now, my thoughts are, well, what if there was an app that was completely different, that was for people of color? Would the things still be the same? And what if white people were the people who are least desirable on this app, right? And then I woke up one day and decided to write about that. Would people start thinking that? So I personally don't put any credence to that thought. I hate it. I hear a lot of people mentioning it, and I feel like it's dragging both of our communities down to feel like we are less than, right? It was something that was for white people, and we just happened to want to participate in it because we didn't have anything else to use, and here we are. That's me. Okay. But thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing.
Hey, Jonah, this is Sunil. I just wanted to share and get some insight from this session. This is our journey to learn more about anti-Blackness, of course. But where we are is that, like Nikita was talking earlier about how her parents are giving her the silent treatment, etc. So it's like, as a parent, you know, initially we had that silent treatment, but then we are willing to accept, but now we need to learn what can we do to undo the feelings that has been caused because of the initial reaction that may have been there. So that's our, so we're basically looking to get some help from you guys to see what thoughts you may have, what ideas maybe there, how that initial reaction that has hurt the other person could actually be, we can never really undo it, but what steps do we need to take?
Cool. Can we put this in the parking lot and pick it up in the last bit when we have like 30 minutes for questions?
Yeah, so I think this discussion is amazing, and we will actually have some time at the end, and we might actually cover some of the topics that are being asked and the questions that are being asked in the chat. So just for the sake of time, we'll move to the next slide, but definitely we'll come back to that.
Cool. All right, this is me. I'm gonna twist through this quickly, right? So so I moderate all of the Blindian Project social platforms right now. So IG, all of them, IG, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, right? It's a lot, right? So allyship, what does it look like, right? What does it look like? What does it actually mean, right? So I've seen so many profiles, right? Because I spend a lot of time on social, so many profiles where the people will have a black square. And that black square, it's almost like if it's starting to feel like a graveyard or a coffin, right? Because I will see people's profiles and there's nothing else on their whole profile about anti-blackness or anything else, right? So this says, I posted a black square in solidarity of BLM and even had the URL in my social profile, you know, the BLM card profile one. When are you going to support the farmers movement, right? We have a message here as well too, right? I started receiving a lot of messages from people about the farmers movement, which is fine, right? One of the visions for the Blindian Project is that we're a media company. We're talking about all different types of things. Essentially, what this person was saying to me is, hey guys, I saw that you were talking about BLM earlier last year, right? Now, we were not talking about BLM last year. All we were doing is talking about our life experiences, right? And as Black men and Black women and as people in Blindian relationships, we're of course talking about oppression. We're of course talking about being in relationships that there are issues against us, right? The person then goes on to say, blah, 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 blah. It would be great if you could, or start to talk about the farmers movement. Now, on the whole, was I in my feelings about this? Yes, I was. But they were cordial about it. They were courteous about it. For me, the whole issue about this is this kind of transactional nature, right? They opened up the note with saying, look, we supported you during this time. Now it's time for you to support us. I personally do not feel like that's how we build solidarity and that's how we build togetherness. One thought that I have in my head is, and I don't know, well, I'd be curious to know, what it seems like it took people a lot of time to actually jump on this BLM bandwagon, if you want to refer to it as BLM, right? Black people have been getting killed, murdered by the police for years. It has been on television. It has been on YouTube. It's still on YouTube for years. So it's almost a sense like, well, why did it all of a sudden become something that people were concerned about? Right? The main question here is, what does transactional allyship do for solidarity amongst communities? Does anyone else have thoughts about this, right? Does anyone else have any thoughts? Has anyone thought about this? Has anybody been poking any platforms that you follow to cover the farmers movement? Have you seen any platforms that have been in support of BLM and thought, well, why aren't they talking about the farmers movement? Comments? Comments on allyship in general?
I just shared in the chat that actually we get DMs like this a lot. Folks asking us, well, how come you don't post about what's happening in the South Asian community? And our intention has been to, for Black lives and centering those experiences. And I think even right now, even right now with the anti-Asian violence that's been happening, seeing almost this pitting and oppression Olympics of, if you said, Black Lives Matter, you also have to, it's a very transactional, like you said, if you do this, then you have to do this too. And seeing that a lot of anti-Blackness even show up in how people responded to the anti-Asian violence, right? Like pro-police conversations, anti-Black language that we use to describe some of the situations that took place. So it is very challenging then to come together in a time when solidarity is needed, because at the end of the day, we're all being targeted by white supremacy. But then we start having these fights amongst our own communities and we're not able to come together during these times where we're all going through a lot of difficult challenges. So yeah, we definitely get that a lot.
So just quickly, without taking too much, because Anjali's she's gonna smack me. what are your feelings when you get those messages and people are talking about, why aren't you talking about the farmers movement? What do you think? Are you thinking about we should post something about that, or are you thinking, what are your thoughts?
Well, part of it is that there's already a lot of really great pages that are posting about this, right? Like Equality Labs, they are experts in this, and we're also not experts in that topic. So even with caste oppression, we understand that there's that intersection between anti-Blackness and casteism, but we're not experts on caste. And Equality Labs, they are experts, and they're posting content about this that is much better than what we'll ever be able to do. So my first thought is like, there's already this resource existing, and what we wanted to do was create specific content for South Asians to really understand racism and anti-Blackness, which isn't as common and isn't out there as much. And the second thing is, why do we feel the need to bring up our own struggles the moment we see someone showing up for the Black community? Like, it's not negating your struggle in any capacity. It's not negating that casteism or the farmers movement is existing and needs support. But I feel like that's a reaction that South Asians have. Like, what about me? What about my community? And it's almost like we haven't been able to work through our own trauma and work through our own struggles. And because of that, we're not able to see beyond that. And we're not able to empathize with another community or show up for another community because we feel like, oh, we have to deal with this first. And it doesn't have to be a either or, it can be a both and.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of stuff about that recently. That you don't have to, you can be anti-Black but also be in support of what's going on with the with Asians just in general as well too. So it is just really interesting, and as a person who's moderating it, it's been really interesting as well too. People just approaching, not even wanting to know what my name is, not even trying to take the time to find what my name is, just saying, look, I've created this about the farmers movement, post it, right? Because you're against oppression, so why don't you go ahead and do it? And I think back to one of the points that we started with, and I'm going to say this very briefly and close. Everybody goes about their journey at their own pace, right? Everybody's not sprinting. Some people are going to be jogging the first 400 meters before they get to sprinting the last kind of the last mile of it, right? So don't push. Just allow people to be. My question is, what are you doing? What are you doing about this? How are you talking about the farmers movement? Because I'm hoping that all of these people who are reaching out and have the time to reach out, that they're trying to do their own thing, because that's essentially how the Blindian Project started. And I imagine that's how South Asian for Black Lives started as well too. It was just an idea, and it's grown into something much bigger than that. Cool. So that's us. That is Dear Brown People. I love that. Thank you, Dre. Thank you, everybody, for participating. If we come back around and we have time, we will we'll pick it back up.
All right, everyone. I'm going to take it from here for a little bit, and I will probably cut a couple things just to make sure we stay on track and give Halima some time to get her content out too. But what I'm going to focus on is actually a lot of what I saw running through the chats, and it was the notions of kind of the expectations we have from South Asian communities and the stigmas that are around those expectations, and how that really contributes to us upholding either intentionally or unintentionally anti-Blackness, and then what that then does for those of us who are in relationships, either romantic or platonic, with Black individuals. And Nikita, and I forget who the other person was who spoke to this, but you both mentioned some really personal stories that we do want to touch on, and I think some of my content will tackle that and maybe hopefully address some of that too. But we're going to start very quickly with an opening activity. So I'm going to stop our screen share for this activity because I want us to be in gallery view so that you can see everybody's black boxes. And so what we're going to do for this activity is we're going to start with our videos off. I'm going to read a few statements, and if the statement applies to you, I want you to turn your video on, or if you don't feel comfortable turning your video on, use one of the reaction buttons. So either raise your hand or clap, one of those reactions. Yep, Halima's doing it right now. And we're going to take a minute to just kind of take in an activity that I will explain after, so it doesn't give it away. But I'm going to turn my video off. So the first prompt is, I want you to kind of think through some experiences that you've had throughout your life. And the first thing I want you to reflect on is turn your video on and give me a reaction. If you've ever had a teacher or a professional in your life say something to you to the effect of, that career choice that you're considering is a little tough. Maybe you should consider something else. Okay, so I see a few reactions. Now, the next question I want you to reflect on is, have you ever been denied a car or home loan? Okay, fewer responses. Number 3, have you ever had a stranger ever change seats on public transportation or across the street when they saw you approaching? Okay, few people. Number 4, has anybody ever said something to the effect of, wow, you're kind of smart for a, insert your race there? Okay. Number 5, has anyone ever commented on or thought you were in the position you were in because of affirmative action? So you didn't get that position because of your effort or your knowledge. You got it because of affirmative action. Okay, a few more. All right, number 6. Have you ever been told you're okay to date, but not okay to marry? All right. Last one. Has anyone ever said to you, I've always had a dream of sleeping with an ex, now race, insert race here, person? All right. Thank you guys for participating in that. So the reason I wanted to do that activity is because I really wanted us to start with a discussion on systemic racism in general. And what does systemic racism mean, right? I think we generally understand the notion of it, but as members of a group with privilege, we often don't really truly know what that looks like day to day. But for our Black counterparts that were a part of this call, I think those microaggressions are really prominent. So what I noticed on the screen, and I'm not sure if everyone else noticed this too, is who I saw turning their camera on for a lot of those questions happened to be Black individuals that were joining the call. And there were occasionally some that applied to some of us South Asians on here as well. But these types of statements are common microaggressions that really are this deep root of systemic issues. So when we talk about systemic racism, what do we mean? It's generally an unfair structure that provides advantages to the white elite and disadvantages to Black individuals and other people of color. Specifically, when we say other people of color, we mean Indigenous and Latinx populations as being the more marginalized and disenfranchised groups. So we have laws and systems that perpetuate white supremacy to uphold this dominance. And it's really based on economic advantage to white individuals. We see this as far back as 400 years ago through enslavement, but it continues with Jim Crow laws and school to prison pipeline, which really should be reframed as the preschool to prison pipeline with how early these biases start. And then even including things like what just happened a month ago here in the United States. I was going to share a video, but what I'm going to do instead, for the sake of time, is I will put this link into our resource page. But this video, again, is a wonderful, wonderful resource on what we really mean when we say systemic racism and how deeply it's ingrained intergenerationally and why it's so hard for us to dismantle this idea of racism. Because again, it's so deep rooted and it really does take a lot of effort and solidarity from other groups that are more privileged like ourselves, the South Asian community. Oh.
This is Jamal. Jamal is
okay, so I'm sure many people have kind of heard about this notion of the model minority myth and how as South Asians, we are kind of ascribed these myths. But generally, South Asians are lauded as kind of an example minority. And the notion is that if as South Asians and immigrants, we can overcome discrimination because of our social and economic successes, then it provides white dominant groups an opportunity to use that as a comparison for why racism doesn't exist for Black people. They're doing it. They've been able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. You can do it too. Racism isn't real. This practice really does pit South Asians against the Black community too, because one, it is affording us some proximity to white culture. We are afforded privileges economically and socially. And then because of that, and because of the gaslighting, it's easy for us to consider ourselves, to really gaslight the process of racism and really undermine its existence. The benefits and the privileges that we do receive contribute to us upholding those model minority myth status, right? So it is nice to be more proximal to white spaces. It is nice to have economic advantages that other groups aren't afforded. So why would we acknowledge some of those privileges? Because then it means that we need to give up some of those privileges, which I don't think people are ready and willing to do in some of these spaces. Sorry. So I think the most important thing is when we're talking about the model minority myth, understanding, again, our proximity to whiteness and how even through this process of anti-racism work and dismantling anti-Blackness, we cannot be silent through that process. And it's easier and more advantageous for us to remain silent, but brown silence upholds racism. And I'm sure many have seen this pyramid that's been circulating throughout the internet, but it essentially breaks down white supremacy, and above the line you have the more overt, what we typically know as being awful. I'll say what we know because this last year has kind of even turned that on its head. But traditionally we think of lynchings, hate crimes, blackface, the KKK as being really problematic overt forms of racism. But there are other covert forms of racism as well that we don't necessarily realize we are engaging in. And as the pyramid opens up, it suggests that the things on the bottom are more common than the ones up top. So things like white silence, I'll call it brown silence, discriminatory lending practices, color blindness, self-selecting into white suburban neighborhoods and picking good schools. Those are all practices that uphold and promote white supremacy. And those are all a lot of practices that we often engage in pretty readily, and we justify them as being a means for us to progress our families and our successes, and prioritizing those without realizing how, by us doing that, we are contributing to upholding white supremacy in the process. This graphic developed by South Asians for Black Lives, I think is a great way to really tie these into more South Asian related issues and topics. And again, you'll see things like right-wing extremism, even in South Asian politics, all the way to staying in our lane, avoiding discussions regarding race with our family and friends, and like beauty standards, as Jonah and Dre both mentioned earlier with colorism, and gentrification, like I just suggested earlier as well. But these pyramids, again, are a nice graphic to highlight how we as a beneficiary of model minority myth really are, again, upholding and contributing to systemic racist practices. All right. So let's get a little bit more into what we mean when we're talking about South Asian expectations, right? And the actual expectations that might lend themselves to this notion of anti-Blackness. So a social stigma is the discrimination against a person or persons based on a perceivable social characteristic. So things like race, economic status, education. Within the South Asian community, we have several themes that pop up. And all of these themes that I've listed here are pretty well documented in academic literature. And if anybody is interested in this from a social science standpoint, I'm happy to share those resources and references later too. And again, we will provide our contact information for Blindian Project, and I'm happy to share my professional contact as well if, again, this is an area that people want more info on from an academic standpoint. But when we're talking about South Asian expectations, we come from a very collectivist culture. So traditionally, I'm going to speak from a American and United States standpoint, but the United States is very individualistic, which means that they kind of promote individual values, individual happiness, growth, goal setting. Collectivism, for those who are less familiar with that, is this idea that the family is, the family unit is kind of promoted over all else. So individual needs go on the back burner so that the family needs come first. And things like honor, loyalty, obedience to the family are expected at all times through all contexts, right? And there's intersectionality here too in terms of gender. So you see differences of kind of what's expected for South Asian males versus what's expected of South Asian females when it comes to this collectivism idea as well. And many people might have heard of this notion of saving face. I know I heard it a lot growing up, but you are supposed to do things to save face throughout, which is to avoid shame, avoid bringing negative attention to the family. And what you must do to save face is, again, promote the family's ideologies and what the family wants. And as Jonah and Dre discussed earlier, a lot of the ideologies that are ingrained in us is this notion or need for proximity to whiteness, right? And so that ideology is stressed over our individual needs. So if you as an individual were to engage in a friendship, in a romantic relationship with a Black person, then that is directly countering the family's ideology of maintaining honor and loyalty to what they think you should be doing. Let's talk about achievement. So high achievement is often stressed in our communities, right? Go to a good school, get great grades, make sure you're successful, make sure you're doing something with your life. And sometimes it can feel as though affection and approval is conditional on our successes and what we achieve. So if a individual chooses to pursue alternative routes, let's say for education or careers that are less traditional, then that's often scrutinized because it goes against this need for you to be at an Ivy League school, getting straight A's and being a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer that's making a lot of money. So along the lines of success, if you choose to marry or if you choose to date outside of the culture, specifically, again, promoting partnerships with Black individuals, then in the eyes of the community, that can be viewed as counter to this need for success and high achievement. Which then brings us into perfectionism, right? So I think because of these themes that are ingrained in us at so young, it really does drive us to this feeling in need of being perfect. And we're often kind of comparing ourselves to the person next to us. How do we get better? How do we do the best? I always think of, I'd come home with a test score of a 98 or something like that. And my dad would say, what happened to the other 2 percentage points, right? It just like wasn't ever enough unless it was perfect. And even if it was perfect, it still wasn't enough. So that promotion of perfectionism can lead to a lot of mental health types of concerns like depression and anxiety. But through that process, we're also taught we can't show weakness, we can't show our flaws, we can't admit that we're doing something wrong. And that piece, I think, really challenges our ability to be a true ally in this fight for anti-Blackness, because one of the main components of being an ally as we progress down this journey, which all of us are learning and relearning and unlearning, is that you have to admit when you're wrong. You have to be able to stop and say, I messed up here and I'm so sorry. How do I do this better? Or let me go figure out and learn how to do this better. And again, when we're taught to be perfect, we are also taught that we can't admit when we've done something wrong. So that also is connected to if and when we were to engage in a relationship with a Black individual, which again, as Jonah mentioned, that hierarchy of the BMWs, that is a strong departure from perfectionism in the eyes of the community. So that's also something for us to remember. And then lastly, traditionalism and conservatism is a huge part of the communities we come from. So typically we, I'll speak as a woman, are told to be pretty conservative in your dating and marriage practices, right? Date within your race and your caste, remain virginal until marriage. Those are the messages that are just strongly pounded over our heads. And when we choose to date somebody outside of our race or caste, and again, when we choose to engage in partnerships with Black individuals, this really challenges that traditional and conservative ideology. So why is this problematic? These themes are a strong part of our culture. They are a strong part of the foundation of what it means to be living in a South Asian community or be a part of a South Asian household. But why it's problematic is because it contributes and it causes traumatic stress for certain groups. So we are inflicting traumatic harm and toxic stress for individuals from other groups, specifically, again, Black and Indigenous people of color. So when we say race trauma, what are we talking about? Racial trauma is the traumatic stress or the cumulative effect of stressors and racism on an individual's mental and physical health. And it's problematic because we have literature that says things like racial trauma can result in physical health outcomes. Like there's higher rates of heart disease and cancer and diabetes if you've experienced traumatic stress in your life. You have higher rates of anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation. And it always makes me take pause and think about how and if my ideologies are causing, even in minute micro interactions, some type of racial traumatic stress response in an individual. Like that's not something I want to do. So that is part of the unlearning and relearning process, right? We have to take pause as a community and think of how we have contributed to these issues, how we continue to contribute to these issues, and then also understand when we engage in those practices, even if they're unconscious and subconscious, it can still have really profound effects on the other person. Now, more specifically, when we look at Blindian relationships, and I think a couple of people spoke to this earlier, but being in a Blindian relationship where the Black person is at risk for experiencing a significant amount of racial trauma, and then being the partner in that relationship, you yourself are at risk for experiencing trauma in that process too. And these issues and what the trauma can look like in these relationships can be anything from family rejection, which is like an outward rejection or discrimination of the person that you're in a relationship with. So maybe doing things as subtle as creating a family group chat where your partner is left off on it, even though they've been your partner for 10 years. You know, that's still continuing to reject the idea or the notion that that person is a part of the family. And it's subtle, but it is insidious, and it is long lasting and can have harmful effects over time. Like it can compound itself. Disownment, which I think most people here kind of know that notion or that ideology, but it's not uncommon for someone who engages in a Blindian relationship to be disowned from their family or their community. And I think maybe some of this is what Nikita kind of spoke to earlier, but just the abandonment or removal from the home or community, or just even cutting contact and ties, right? And no matter our age, that's still powerful and that's still impactful and still harmful for us. The gaslighting, so manipulating you into feeling that your experiences around the racism are just overreactions. Like, we don't know what you're talking about, right? We're people of color too. We've experienced discrimination too. There's no way we're racist. That can't be it. That gaslighting, again, form of emotional trauma that can impact the Black individual, can impact the person who's in the partnership, and it also has long-lasting effects, like I said, that can compound over time. Silent complacency, a lack of action from a loved one who become silent observers of the abuse and trauma. And I think this ties back into this theme of collectivism, where it's easy for us to not say anything, even if we see something being overtly racist, if it doesn't impact us, right? Our sister's in a relationship with a Black man, and we see them experiencing racism that I'm not experiencing, but that's not my problem. Why am I gonna rock the boat? Why am I gonna say something? So I'm just gonna be quiet. When really that's a problem. We need, if we're talking about solidarity and allyship, even in those moments that they don't apply to us, we need to be actively engaged. So the silent complacency can make individuals feel really isolated and withdrawn, because it can feel like there isn't a lot of support within the community. Forced choices. So having to make really difficult choices of picking the family versus your individual happiness and priority, or your relationship, right? And again, to what some of the participants here spoke to, that can be really challenging, because it then kind of pits your relationship against your family, and it's hard to be happy and true and full and in the moment with your relationship, and really celebrate those successes that you're having, when you have these other looming factors that are causing this traumatic response for you. And then lastly, stonewalling, which is, some people might experience a refusal from their family members to communicate or even participate in any type of discussion with you unless you meet some type of conditional demand, right? We'll meet your partner if you finish your degree. You finish your degree, and all of a sudden they still don't want to meet your partner, right? We'll meet them after you get a good job. Oh, once you're financially secure, right? And it can feel like you're never really fully living up to or meeting whatever demand that they're setting. So I think that the answer to the questions that are coming up of what do we do, there isn't a great answer other than we have to acknowledge that these are traumas that we can experience and that we are experiencing. We have to call it that first. We have to recognize and be aware of what that means, like what types of responses we can have from that trauma. And then we have to remember that in order to heal, not only do we need to be patient, but our community members need to be patient, and we need nurturance and we need support. And sometimes that nurturance and support might not come from the people that we think it should come from, right? And a huge part of the healing and recovery from some of these issues is reframing our expectations for ourselves and resetting and re-understanding our boundaries in that process too. So again, removing the notions of should. My parents should be supportive of me. My parents should care that I'm happy right now. My parents should be excited that I've finally found somebody, right? Because all of those things are true, but if we stuck on and held on to those shoulds, that's where we get stuck in our progression, in our happiness, in our growth from the trauma and the toxic stress. And when it comes to anti-Blackness within these spaces, we have to make space for race, right? We have to talk about race. We have to talk about the impact of race on our daily interactions. We have to check in with our Black partners about how they feel when when they get left off of a group chat, family group chat, even though they've been around for a decade and a half, right? Like, how does that make you feel? And let's talk about that. And what can we do to address this? How do you feel when somebody decided they wanted to get up from the table at the wedding and go eat elsewhere because you're sitting at the table? Like, those are all important things that we have to acknowledge are occurring and be mindful of. And then also, we have to be brave enough to kind of ask that of our Black friends and our Black partners. Again, we have to make the space for race. We have to talk about it. This came up a little earlier when we were talking about allyship, and I think is a nice segue into Halima's conversation of what we should do as allies. But what we find oftentimes as the Blindian team is, you know, I feel really conflicted as a South Asian member of the team because I just kind of want to protect and keep them from having to experience these harms that come up in our social media spaces. But a lot of times when we try and talk about anti-Blackness in the South Asian community, we see like three main themes. The whataboutisms, centering yourself, and withdrawing or just avoiding the conversation. So when we say whataboutisms, right, it's when a Black person speaks to their oppression and their systemic challenges, and then we say, well, what about these issues we feel as South Asians too, right? So the example I put there is a Black person telling you, well, Black people have experienced oppression for over 400 years. And as a South Asian responding, well, what about the caste-based oppression that we see in South Asian communities? I kid you not, we are seeing a lot of this right now in the social media spaces because of what's happening at the farmers' protests, and Jonah and Halima both spoke to this. But it's really important and this moves into the centering thing, but we try not to take up the spaces that are intended for our Black creatives in the process of them healing. So centering is this notion of kind of placing your experiences at the center of the discussion and kind of refocusing conversation to your experiences. And when we're doing anti-racism and anti-Blackness work, we really want to, again, provide spaces for Black creatives and Black individuals to have their conversations and provide their content, right? So if a Black person is talking to you and they say, I've experienced a lot of microaggressions and racism in the South Asian community, a centering response could be, and what we've seen sometimes is individuals saying, well, Black people have discriminated against me for being South Asian my whole life. Why aren't we talking about that, right? Also problematic. And then the last one is withdrawing or avoiding, which I think this is common to all groups because the conversation about race, conversation and admitting that we all have a long way to go with learning and unlearning and relearning and healing is tough. Nobody wants to admit that. Nobody wants to have those conversations. So what we are programmed to do as humans is to avoid and deflect and just kind of escape and run away from those conversations. So for example, a Black individual saying to you, my mother-in-law just told me she thinks our kids will look ugly because they're going to be Black. And somebody responding, well, you know how aunties are, right? Like, just let it go. Do you want to just go catch a movie or something instead? Get your mind off of it. That is avoiding the conversation. That's withdrawing and disengaging. So it's really important that as we do this work, we are mindful that we do not engage in these practices as we learn to be better allies in this process. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Halima.
Thank you. Give me 1 second. So are you able to screen share, Anjali? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be going over South Asian anti-racist solidarity. Some of these are also broadly applicable to non-Black people of color in general. Oh, Anjali, are you able to keep the screen up?
Sorry, can I say something? Are we okay in the chat?
I think we are, yes.
Okay, right. Okay, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great, but I just want to make sure everyone's okay in the chat and there's no like trolling.
I'm not okay. Okay, I'm not okay in the chat because I feel like you guys are attacking me just because I stated my opinion. I don't feel any respect.
I haven't seen your comment though, personally. What is the issue? What's going on?
I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with Halima. She threatened to kick me out just because I was saying my opinion.
Well, Tal, we agreed in the community agreements to create a space where folks can share without us kind of attacking. And I simply ask that you respect that group agreement. And if you can't respect that, then unfortunately we would have to remove you. And there's just like a lot of denying of other people's experience, which we also want to respect that everyone has their own experience. So
I never did. I never did that. You never let me state my opinion. You come and attack me. I'm telling you how I feel. How can you tell me how I feel is wrong?
I'm not telling you how to feel, but denying other people's feeling is where I was having some issue with that. So unfortunately, you know, we do want to focus on this content that we have here and this presentation of the topic. And if this is not something that you want to be a part of, that is okay. But we ask that you just respect everyone in the chat.
Well, that's what I was doing. You were the one that was coming at me.
Okay, cool. Let's go then. If we have respect, right, then let's respect and let's finish up.
All right, so I'm going to be closing out with a little bit on anti-racist solidarity and starting with just defining what anti-racism is. I know we use that term a little bit, and then also sharing some principles and values on how we can engage in meaningful solidarity. After this session is over, we will be sending you a resource list. So for those who wanted to dive deeper, definitely will include reflection questions, journaling activities that you can do so that you can get more into the content. So we'll go to the next slide. And just want to start with a little bit on why it is so important for us to address anti-Blackness in the South Asian community and broadly in non-Black communities in general. And I think a lot of us are on the same page on this, but just to reiterate that anti-Blackness, racism, and structural oppression continue to result in negative economic, health, and social outcomes for the Black community. And they also have impacts on the South Asian community as well. I think Anjali did a great job of highlighting what those health impacts are, the social outcomes, economic impacts, financial impacts. And it's important that we examine our own community and how we've been complicit in perpetuating this oppression, and also looking at how we examine the ways in which anti-Blackness is also impacting our own communities through things like colorism, through things like who we get to have a relationship with, and making sure that we're linking the interconnectedness between South Asian and Black struggles for liberation, really looking at colonialism and white supremacy as those root causes that are impacting all of our communities, and making sure that our cross-racial solidarity work is intentional, and it's also necessary for our collective liberation, so we can really work together to fight back against those root causes. All right, next slide. So I just wanted to pose this question for the group. Feel free to respond in the chat. Why is addressing anti-Blackness important for your community? Where are you seeing the urgency? So feel free to drop some responses in the chat and I'll read them out. Any thoughts, responses?
I know I'm one of the contributors, but can I jump in real quick?
Of course.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that, well, we have to address anti-Blackness within every community, not just South Asians, but I would even say for the Black community as well, is that this stuff doesn't stop. It affects everything. It seeps into everything. None of us are safe. None of us are okay unless all of us are safe and okay. So we can play these games of I will be a model minority, or I will just kind of go along to get along and everything is going to be fine for me. But at what point? Like we see this right now that this thing is global. A great example is what's going on with farmers in India right now. Is this is just another example of the coercive apparatus of the state hurting people. And that is what happens here to Black people. That's what happens to people throughout the world. So we can't do this thing where it's happening to them so it doesn't affect me, because eventually it will get to you. It doesn't stop.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and just that reminder that the whatever temporary privileges that you have as a non-Black person, they're temporary and they'll be revoked at any point when white supremacy decides, oh, we no longer want to use you, or we don't have a use for you. And we saw that with COVID, right? That immediately that model minority card was taken away when we saw a lot of the anti-Asian commentary around COVID-19 and the violence that we're seeing now. So that even that interconnectedness, and I think what folks sometimes call selfish solidarity, I think is that other reason why we need to address this. And I'm seeing some responses in the chat. Go ahead.
Hey, this is Wagner. Hope everyone's doing well today. I would just say that anti-Blackness in the community is important for the fact of that it's exported primarily by Western culture to other countries to make sure that if you have this skin color or if you look like this is how we will look at you. And it's important in regards to making sure that when you approach America, or rather Western culture, you approach it in a certain way. You don't look a certain way, you don't look a certain model, because we will not do business with you, we will not acknowledge you, we will not see you. And I think it's important for that respect to make sure that we understand that no matter how you look, no matter how you dress, no matter how you speak, we will always see you as a person. So for me, that's very important that we address anti-Blackness in the fact that it is making sure that it's a thin veneer for basically saying that, hey, we will not deal with you if you're not, if you do not if you do not become like us.
Yeah, that push towards forced assimilation, and even thinking like, why are we as South Asians buying into a system that forces us to assimilate in order to gain access to some level of power? For the sake of time, I'm going to move to the next slide, but I see some really great responses in the chat, and really starting to explore, what does solidarity mean? And for you as participants to reflect on, what are you willing to give up as an ally, as a comrade, as an accomplice and co-conspirator? And I'll be sharing a resource after this session, diving deeper into how you can engage in meaningful solidarity. So going into the next slide, just wanted to share some general principles, practices, overarching frameworks. First, reminding all of us that as we're thinking of solidarity, especially how we show up for the Black community, that when we're prioritizing work, making sure that we're prioritizing action items from Black organizers and Black serving organizations who've been doing this work since day one, who have a very clear understanding of what is needed in order for us to move towards Black liberation. Again, making a list of things you're willing to give up, willing and able, and also things that maybe are more difficult to give up, because for us to change systems and see a real impact, we have to have a shift in power dynamics. So maybe if you have a prominent role at an organization, you take a different role that's more backseat and give that role to a Black person so that they can take that leadership and be in the front. Or if you're being offered a media opportunity, maybe you pass that on to a Black creative. So just being mindful of what you're able to give up, and sometimes it's not easy, and that's the point. Donating your time, energy, and funds to community organizations and individuals that are doing the very difficult work of challenging anti-Black racism. I would especially urge you to think of Black-led organizations that are local to your community. Being open-minded and being ready to accept feedback without being defensive, because we're all learning and unlearning. And that piece I would really stress, because it can be human nature, right? When someone calls you out or calls you in to get defensive and say, oh, I didn't mean to, or whatever it is. But when we're thinking of solidarity and allyship, it's important for us to remember that it's not about you, that it's actually a gift that someone took time to call you in or call you out and tell you that, hey, this wasn't okay. And that's a learning opportunity for you. So it's not about you. It's when we center our own feelings and, oh, I felt this way when you called me out, then we do make it about ourselves, and that centering piece, as Anjali was saying. And so just building your capacity to take that feedback, no matter how it's given, because we shouldn't expect that feedback to come in a nicely packaged way. Maybe it was said how it was said, but that's something that we need to build our capacity for. And then evaluating our roles and where we best fit in. I would encourage all of you to check out Deepa Iyer's Our Role in Social Movements map, where she kind of outlines these are the different roles and leaders and positions that are needed for us in the movement. All of us have different skill sets, passions, and joys. Maybe you are making food for organizers. Maybe you're taking care of the kids while people go out and organize a rally. Maybe you're the one putting up a website page or setting up the GoFundMe. So all of you can think about where your roles are and where we best fit in, and at the same time being mindful that we don't need to be at the forefront. We don't need to be the ones that are making a movement. We're here to support a movement. And as Then Mosey, who's the ED of Equality Lab, said, we don't need an influencer movement. We need a listening and learning movement. So the movement's already there. We just need to get behind it and listen and learn. Now I wanted to share some specific things around how you can kind of go through the process of combating anti-Blackness. So these are 4 steps. And I said earlier when I introduced South Asians for Black Lives, the reason why we chose awareness and education as our primary work was because of this kind of ideology that is sourced from the Anti-Racism Starter Toolkit. So the first piece around combating anti-Blackness is becoming aware of anti-Black racism and acknowledging that it exists within your community and it exists within yourself. And so that's the point where maybe I'm noticing, okay, I crossed the street when I saw a Black person, or I moved to another seat. And that's me being aware of my own anti-Black racism and acknowledging that it exists within my community and myself. Maybe it's the point where I realize, oh, my parents have been telling me that, I shouldn't go outside too long. It's going to make my skin darker. And that's a point of anti-Black racism and anti-Blackness and colorism, right? So that awareness piece is really important. The second piece is around education. So once we're aware of the issue, this is when we start to look into the history of anti-Blackness. We look at anti-racism resources and actively educate ourselves. Folks who are leading in this space, like Dr. Ibram Kendi, they've done this work for decades. They have done the learning and they have put in that time and dedication, and we need to do that as well. The third step is around self-interrogation. So after we have done this awareness piece, this learning, how does this apply to our own identity? How does this apply to our role in upholding anti-Blackness, and specifically thinking about our own history as South Asians? In our history, we have many points in our history, unfortunately, where South Asians have upheld anti-Blackness. We see stories like Bhagat Singh Thind, who went and lobbied to be counted as white and took that all the way to the courts. And so those are histories that we have to reconcile with. And there's also histories of South Asians engaging in social justice solidarity work. So what can we learn from that, and what can we be critical of in that regard? And then finally, moving towards community action. And when we go through these steps, we'll avoid mistakes like posting Black squares, because we didn't just jump from an awareness point to then education. We actually took the time to be intentional, think through this, really reflect, and also sit with that racial stress and racial tension that Anjali was talking about. It's important for us, I think, as non-Black people to be able to build our capacity to hold racial stress, because sometimes we feel racial stress and there's that fragility component where we don't want to feel that discomfort anymore and we want to move on. But we have to learn to sit with that, and racial stress and racial competency, it takes time to build, and it's not comfortable. Like I know for myself personally, when I'm feeling racial stress or racial tensions, I might start sweating, I might feel nervous, I want to move out of that conversation. But how do I build my own capacity to stay in that conversation and move through that feeling? Because that's what we need to do to be able to engage in really difficult conversations. Let's move to the next slide. So just want to define anti-racism. I love the racial equity definition there too, just in case, because I know both terms are used a lot in the space. So anti-racism is an ongoing and active process of identifying, challenging, and ending racism through awareness, education, and action. And it's not only an internal process where you're changing your thoughts and behaviors. So when I share, in terms of the internal process, what that could look like is when I'm noticing, okay, I used African-American vernacular English, internally, I might pause and say, that was not appropriate for me to do. And I'm going to name that and make a mental note, and in the future, avoid that. So that's how I'm working towards changing my own internal thoughts and behaviors. Or maybe I used an anti-Black word, like using the term Black sheep or using the term slave instead of enslaved. And so I'm naming that internally so I can start changing my own internal thought process. But anti-racism goes beyond that because it's also an external process, because we need to change systems and policies. We're looking at more than 400 years of oppression, and that's not going to go away because I change my own internal behaviors and thought processes. It's going to require that external component where we're shifting systems and changing policies. And for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over racial equity definition, but this will be shared with you after the session. So in the next slide, just wanted to take some time to go over specific ways in which you can engage in anti-racism in your Blindian relationship. And this is for all relationships, platonic or romantic. And so the first piece is around communication, honesty, and transparency. And Anjali and Jonah and Dre touched on this a little bit. So it's really starting with that honest conversation with your friend, your partner about racism in your family, in your friend group, and ensuring that there's options for that person if they prefer not to engage with that racist family member or friend or be in that gathering. The second thing is around asking how your partner or your friend would like to be supported, or how they would like you to intervene if there is an anti-Black person or a racist person in your group that you might be communicating or interacting with, and making sure you have that kind of down in advance and there's that communication. It might be an uncomfortable conversation, but when something happens, you would know how to support that person the way that they would prefer. The second piece is around boundaries, and this is also something that I think the earlier speakers referred to. Always making sure that we're communicating and ensuring that our boundaries are upheld as it relates to racial stress, racism, and anti-Blackness. And these are not just boundaries for the individual, but they're also boundaries for your community, for your family, who may be the cause of racial stress or racial trauma, or are perpetuating racism. And so maybe it is creating that boundary that we're actually not going to engage with this family member, or we're not going to be showing up to these gatherings, and holding that boundary, or that, you know, if you say an anti-Black sentiment, you know, in front of us, we're not going to come to your place anymore. You know, really creating that strong boundary and making sure there's communication around what is needed from your partner or friend. Also, do not seek validation for your racism or bias, or place that burden of education on your partner or your friend, and be intentional about the emotional labor as it relates to race that's placed on them. Be mindful of that. For example, you know, maybe your friend or your partner is not the person that you're going to go to talk about police violence or the most racist incident that you've seen happen in the news. Maybe that is something that you process with your non-Black friends or partners, or, you know, other people, but just being mindful of what you are putting on that person. Also being mindful of the impact of racial trauma on your friend or your partner. For example, you know, maybe you're having a movie night and you're getting together and thinking about what movie you're going to watch, and just be mindful there might be potential anti-Blackness or trauma, such as police violence in the movie, and make sure that there is that conversation. Do we still want to watch this movie? Are you comfortable with watching this, or do you want to opt out? And so make sure you're offering those options. For example, you know, there is a lot of movies like Fruitvale Station or Just Mercy, and they're very educational and something that as non-Black people we do need to see. But that's a very different experience for a Black person who's watching that movie, who may feel trauma, sadness, anger, or pain. And so the impact of that movie will be completely different. And just even thinking how much of a privilege it is that it's an educational thing for you to watch, while it may be extremely, extremely triggering for another person. And then finally, for boundaries, you know, just being mindful that your partner or your friend is not your soundboard on what is racist or not racist for you to do. And it's not their job for them, you know, to call you out or to tone check you. And you should definitely not place that burden or expectation on them for them to be that person to do that. And then for education and action, proactively educate your racist family members. That is your responsibility. And that takes time. It's not going to be a one-time conversation. It might take years before you see any progress or change. And we do have tips on how to engage racist family members on our social media if you're interested. Speak up, you know, if others are framing your interracial friendship, relationship as a social justice success. It is definitely not, you know, and we've shared on this piece, particularly on our social media, around how interracial relationships are not saving America or solving racism. So if others have that ideology, make sure that you're breaking it down, and also don't claim to be not racist simply because you are in a relationship with or to a Black person. Build your own awareness and hold yourself accountable. So if you're using anti-Black language, if you're appropriating Black culture, internally note that and avoid it in the future, and definitely take the appropriate steps to make amends. And if you are anti-Black towards your partner, apologize, educate yourself, and don't make that same mistake again. And also don't place the burden of education on your partner or your friend. Change behavior is what's going to make the biggest difference. And we'll be sharing resources on how to give a good apology by Bia Mingus. And then finally, some reminders on the next slide. Your relationship with a Black person doesn't give you a pass to appropriate Black culture, but there is a difference between appropriation versus accepting a gift from a family or friend or being invited into the culture. So just be mindful of where that line is. And then also just a reminder that anti-racism work must happen regardless of your relationship to a Black person. This is something that everyone needs to be engaging in regardless. And if we're only engaging in anti-racism because of our relationship to a Black person, it is not going to be sustainable or necessarily coming from the right place. And then finally, keeping in mind that everybody is different. So there isn't a one size fits all on how to be anti-racist or what anti-racism in your relationship will look like. Every relationship is different. So communication will be key in making sure that we are engaging in this in a meaningful way and not just like, oh, I got this template and these are the steps. So yeah, that's all my notes on this, and I'll be sharing that with sharing these notes with all of you as well after. And to close out, just wanted to give you all. I know we're like basically at time, so I'll just send this in the follow-up email, but to urge all of you to do some self-inventory work where you take time to reflect on these questions. And to think through the way that you have been socialized, how that's impacted you, and also what actions you're going to commit yourself to in order to challenge and disrupt anti-Blackness, and also really thinking about how can you make this sustainable and consistent. So I'm going to pause here because I know we're out of time and I want to leave some room for discussion. So if you can revisit any of the discussions, questions that people had or things we didn't get to go through yet.
I have a question, is that okay?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Hi, firstly, thank you so much for taking the time to educate us. I really appreciate it. So I guess my question is, and you kind of already touched on this, but how do you, if you know, a close family member says something that is kind of upholds anti-Blackness, but they are themselves unwilling to admit that or find it offensive when you say to them, you know, everyone has internalized racist thoughts and all that kind of stuff. How do you then try and get through to that person in a sustainable way that doesn't just kind of end up in an argument? Because I often find it, I think for me as well, I'm quite an emotional person and I find it quite difficult to have these conversations without just like crying and stuff, which I know is something that I need to work on. But yeah, I guess that's my question. Like, how do you not so much develop the mental strength, but like try and have these conversations with patients and stuff, and develop compassion for those people as well, because obviously they think those things because they've been conditioned to think them, if that makes sense.
Sorry, with patients or with family, or sorry, you said patients.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just wondering, like, when you when someone around you, especially a close family member, says something but like does uphold anti-Blackness, how do you then try and open up that discussion without just it ending in an argument? Especially with people who like tend to be quite stubborn or like believe that they're right because they're older than you and they've had more life experience, and they're not necessarily like themselves updating their knowledge when it comes to anti-racist work.
Sure. Let me just say my bit quickly. What I noticed is, so I said before, Ugandan American. My parents came to the States 75. My father is a cardiologist, so he's a Republican as well too, right? So he very much had this idea that anybody can just come here and do whatever they want, right? all you have to do is work hard and try hard and things like that. He started to really appreciate it when I was able to start having conversations with him, whether it was about politics or world issues, whatever it was. So for me, I feel like in terms of this conversation, there's so many different topics that can be used or raised to kind of talk about other topics, if that makes sense. For example, if you are in an interracial relationship with a Black person, perhaps you're talking about Kamala Harris. Perhaps you're asking about her identity or something like that, right? And I think that can be used to actually start some like really interesting conversations, which can lead you to where you're actually wanting to get to. So it feels like the 2020, 2021 have been years where there's been so much racial and just other conversations taking place. There's so many things in the media that you can kind of link to start those conversations. And then I think from there, as you touched on, it's just about, for me, what I was always trying to do was trying to have a level-headed conversation with my father to let him know that, you know, I've changed, I've matured, and I'm able to try to talk about these topics. That's my view.
Cool. Thank you.
I just
real quickly. Oh,
as like
sorry,
a
go
really
ahead.
emotional person myself, and having had a tough time with those conversations with family members, I think part of the work is, and you alluded to this in some ways, but it's kind of like managing our own affect and our emotions during the process, and like trusting that eventually something will stick. So it's like the persistence piece, and that's where like I have a hard time, is like finding the strength to keep going back and to keep doing it, right? I like to use this analogy in like clinical work I do, but usually things get worse before they get better. So sometimes those conversations are going to get really tough and be really tough, but if you keep chipping away at it, hopefully there's something that's going to break and make some type of impact eventually, which doesn't feel good in the moment. And it's not a quick fix solution either, right?
Well, to piggyback on what you just said, like I know that's what's worked for me and my family, coming from a background that's very, you know, anti-gay. Just like getting through to my parents over time has just been, every once in a while when they would say things like the F word or anything that would be considered a gay bashing, you just, you know, all right, that's not cool, and you move on. Don't do that. Move on. Every single time they say it, just correct them really quickly before, and eventually just becomes one of those things like, oh, I can't say this anymore. It doesn't have to be very long. It doesn't have to be a speech. It just has to be, all right, that's not cool. And being the fact that you're their child in a lot of ways gives you a lot more weight than other people. So just continuously correcting them, and might be, you know, something you might want to explore.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Let's go.
That's good. What would be like your advice of, so for me, I experienced like a lot of racism from her family, whether it's like socioeconomic, just things like that.
Direct to you.
Direct, like, yeah, well, let me just put it,
not
directly, not said to me, but
through me.
Through her.
Like things are said to me, obviously, about it, and he hears, you know, about it through me. So
yes,
Jonah, you want to take this one? Because I definitely know we can talk about this all day.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically because it's like for me, it's like I come from like, if someone don't like you, all right, and I know you are, you stay on your side, I'll be good. It's kind of harder when it's her family and everything, right? And so it's tough, you know. I've been talking about like as far as my education and all that, becoming a teacher. Oh, you should be this and that. It's like, or oh, you shouldn't be with a black man. All these different things, right? So I'm like, for me, I'm like, my instinct, my default is like, F you, all right, bet. But it's harder because we're in a relationship and everything. I love you, you know, everything. And so it's like, I need some advice, bro.
Wait, fam, all right, wait, where are you from? I'm getting New York, Philly vibes from where you from?
No, I'm from
we're in Seattle.
We're in Seattle.
Oh, because just the way you approach that, like, yo, I ain't messing with you.
Yeah,
Very New York.
I was born in Ohio, so a lot of my family's from Ohio. So
Okay.
I got a little bit of that in me, but yeah.
Sorry, Jonah, you were gonna speak. My bad.
No. All I was gonna say is somebody else had a similar question, and I still need to follow it up, right? But the question basically was, have you met the family? Have you met the parents?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, right. So the question that was posed to me that I still need to follow up on is, what about and I don't even want to use confront, but having a man-to-man conversation with, like, perhaps the father, or having a straight up conversation with the parents, right? I've talked to a lot of people who have been like, they just, at one point in time, because they had already met them, it was just like, all right, let's sit down, let's talk about everything. What are your issues with me? What are your issues about me? You know, perhaps my profession, and just trying to have a serious conversation. I think this goes back to what Anjali and what everyone else was talking about as well too. My thing is, whenever you get in that situation where you're able to have the conversation, it's trying to be like even more in control than you are like normally, right? And just trying to let those people walk away from the situation where they're like, damn, like they're really serious. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're really serious and like they really, really want this. And just like instead of it being like a shouting match or something where, like, you know, curse words are thrown and things like that, just trying to have it be a very, very mature conversation. But link with us on IG. I will reach out, because I know there's several couples where and it was actually specifically Black partners effectively had to have a word with the parents, and it worked out successfully in both occasions. I haven't had anyone else who has talked to that, but it seemed to work.
Can I also add, because I think this is something specific to not only being Black, but also being male, because I just recently went through this. I just got engaged. And I think when I was having the conversation with her parents, it wasn't so much what you do. I think, and this is one of those things I know it's always incumbent upon us as Black people to always have to be empathetic when people are being shitty to us. It's not fair, it's not right. But I think what would also help is that you take it from their point of view. They just want to know that you can take care of their daughter if shit hits the fan. That's basically all that comes down to. That's the bottom line. So I think, like, showing that you have a financial plan, showing that you actually have, like, you know, a plan for the future will definitely help with that, because I know that helped in my situation.
Yeah.
So I agree, like, with everything Jonah said, like having a man-to-man and having a talk. But also remember, this isn't just about being a Black. It's also because you're man. It's a very patriarchal system, and we can have a whole different conversation about that nonsense. But yeah, just like something to keep in mind, bro.
Isn't that a form of racism, showing that you also have to have a plan to take care of someone in general? So that feels to me personally, and I'm not trying to attack
very much.
Oh, but that's the thing. I would say that if it weren't true for other men within the community that also have to show a plan, that's why they're so heavily focused on profession, so heavily focused. And I'm an accountant. I do this for a living. There's a lot of people with good salaries that have shitty money skills. So no matter how much you make, it doesn't mean anything. But I think that's basically what that comes down to for a lot of people with the profession question.
But I think too, I don't know who just said that comment, but I have to agree with it. That's part of the issue with the South Asian community, right? Is that this need for high achievement has to be the approval that comes with being in these relationships. Like, why can't you just be who you are without having to justify that?
But that's the thing, though. Would you be allowed to do that if you were date? Like, could she date a guy who's working at a grocery store and not have any friction? Would the same conversation come up? Or is it because the partner is Black that it comes up?
I think it's intersectional, right? But the fact that he is Black doesn't help the conversation. And I think, to Jonah's point, just really quick, to make it like a more concrete statement, we had somebody in the community talk about when he went to propose to his fiance, who's South Asian. He went to the dad and he literally said to the dad, I'm Black. Is this going to be a problem for you? Like, let's just put this on the table. Like,
That's
you know,
right. That's right.
like, let's clear the air here. Like,
That's
the fact
real.
is that going to be a problem for you? And that sparked a conversation, like a real conversation, and they had a good conversation over it, and they're engaged, they're happy, like they're moving forward with their life. But I, as somebody who like encourages open communication, I think that's a scary thing to do, but it also just keeps it real, right? Like you just put it all out there and try and address it directly.
Yeah.
That's real. Thank y'all for real.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Something that I think has really helped us in regards to that issue specifically, because my parents have put a lot of pressure on, you know, he is becoming an incredible teacher. That is, you know, his career path. But I grew up in a community where, you know, you got to be a doctor, engineer, you know, whatever it is. And so I think when my parents have put barriers in front of us, such as what kind of salary do teachers make or whatever, we've think, you know, with the help of some really incredible mentors, we've been able to say, you know what, like, if that question isn't important to us, then we don't need to think about it. But maybe we can use it as a way to make us stronger and say, what kind of life are we building together? Is this going to be enough for us? Not our parents, not our friends, not people who are, you know, don't have anything to do with our relationship, but what does it mean for us? And we've been trying to use, it's obviously way easier said than done, but been trying to use the barriers that my parents have put in front of us, instead of like fighting it, almost using it as a way to make us stronger and figure out what is actually important to us as a couple rather than our community.
Yeah,
That's dope.
for sure. Yeah.
I love that because I like to think of Blindian relationships as some of the most resilient relationships I've ever known. And the reason I think that is because it forces us to have these really difficult conversations in our partnerships. And it really kind of tests our love, right? And whether or not we are going to be in this for the long fight, and whether we really, like how much do we care about the other person to endure such harmful things. So I love that you all are taking these barriers and like flipping them on its head and using it to like positively support your relationship. That's beautiful.
Plus, it's pretty cool to come back to your parents and say, yeah, I actually have thought about this and here's our plan. So
I have a question. I'm actually a product of a Blindian couple. My parents are from the Caribbean, and so I have an Indo-Caribbean parent and an Afro-Caribbean parent. And I guess my question is, how can I'm very active in my Caribbean community in Minnesota, and we've had discussions like this, but I feel like there's still some hesitancy about it. So I'm wondering, what's a great way to approach a topic like this with my community in order to help kind of make people more comfortable about who their partner is? Because I hear a lot of things. I grew up with a lot of Indo-Caribbean people who are afraid to bring their partners around their families. I was also involved with somebody with the same. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at right now, is to kind of how to bring up, how to help other people in my community with this.
I was gonna let Jonah speak to this, but he does on our Instagram page earlier this week, he posted a bunch of slides, which I think were really great starting points for the conversation of finding the connections between the two groups and the two cultures. Because I think a lot of times where the South Asian racism comes from is from fear sometimes of the unknown, and this difference in community and the difference in culture, when really there are a lot of similarities, right? And we all should, like when we're talking about solidarity, come together as people of color to kind of combat this larger anti-racism issue. But I wonder if starting at a place of finding commonalities and connectedness would be a helpful starting point, so that they can see either comparisons and try and empathize with some of the struggles themselves, maybe through their own experiences that they've had, but also see that like really the other side is not that different.
Well, I think her situation is a little different because like I'm Jamaican, so I am like well acquainted with Indo-Caribbean people that come from the same island and just have a rift, like live their own separate kind of life. So the challenge might just be, you just have to keep doing it until it becomes normalized, like just bring people around, because it's not like they're not aware. It's not like they don't know. It's not like they don't see them. It's just they have this segregation that has to be fought through.
Yeah, sorry. And then just quickly, my thought is just like, I mean, again, like everything doesn't have to be spoken directly to the point that you're actually trying to make. It could be an indirect point that actually touches upon it, right? So anytime that something may be raised in your direct vicinity or somewhere around there, like you just become this person that just doesn't stand for any, like doesn't stand for any bullshit, right? Or any, you know, bakwas or anything of this stuff that you guys say, right? And you just become this person. And then probably later you turn into this auntie, right? Who is just this person and this figure who just doesn't stand for any crap and just speaks openly whenever there are any, it could be racism, it could be just, and it could be anything wrong in general. You are the person that is speaking out against it, right? And you have your view and you have your opinion. And I think slowly after time, at least in my position, slowly after time, other people who have that same view start to gravitate towards that. And then it just comes a part of your existence, really. It just becomes a part of who you are. And that's how you effectively make the change from there, right?
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing in the chat and for the questions. And I do apologize if we weren't able to get to everything. And I'm also sorry that, you know, I know that I probably missed some of the chats, you know, while speaking, and probably all of us have missed some of the chats, but we have shared our contact information in the chat, and we'll be emailing all of you recording of this as well as follow-up resources. And I just want to also name that, you know, this was a pretty heavy conversation, and apologize in advance if we didn't share necessarily like how heavy it might get. So just as we close out, wanted to encourage all of us to take a couple of deep breaths together, just to release some of that tension that we might be holding. So we'll breathe in together, breathing in 1, 2, 3, and just hold 1, 2, 3, and slowly breathing out 1, 2, 3. And we'll do that 3 more times. As you breathe in, I just want you to think of everything that we processed today. 1, 2, 3. Hold. 1, 2, 3. And releasing 1, 2, 3. On this last breath, as we breathe in, 1, 2, 3. Hold. As we breathe out, I want you to just let out a big, just release. So we're going to breathe out. 1, 2, 3. Release all of it. So yeah, again, want to just apologize if things did get a bit heavy, but that is also part of the work, is engaging in these uncomfortable, difficult conversations. We appreciate all of you for being here and spending your Saturday morning with us, or Saturday evening, wherever you're calling in from, and we'll be in touch. And with that, we will close out.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.